Okay, for those of you that are in the room and ready to start, if you don't mind, if you can take out your cell phone, that's really the easiest way to do it, and take your camera app and zoom into that QR code. Once you do that, you'll click on that URL for our sign-in to register your attendance. The first thing you'll need is the session code, which you'll see there on the screen, 887585. And then the next section wants you to locate your site location. Let me tell you, the easiest way to do that is to go down to where the zip code is. Put in your zip code, I've got it there on the screen for you, and then click that yellow button that says search. And then you'll get a drop-down menu in the site location where you can select your site. Then at the bottom of that, you'll fill in your information. Of course, this is the discipline of math, and the program is Saxon Math. So, hello.
Hi, we have to just start our open meeting, so if you'll give us just one moment, okay? Sorry to cut you off there.
That's okay, and I've got some good news for you, before we finish.
Awesome. So this meeting is going to be our Loretta Zambro Elementary School Math Primary Resource Meeting number 3. This meeting is open to the public, and we encourage and welcome members of our community to observe. I am moving to 1.1, call to order and introductions. I would like to call our meeting to order at 4:01 p.m. Before we begin introductions, please remember to use a microphone when speaking, as our meeting is being recorded for public viewing. And if I can add that, when you are also working with our trainer, you will need to use a microphone so she's able to hear you once we go through the training, okay? I'll start the introductions. Welcome, I'm Susanna Finn, Curriculum and Instruction Coordinator. And if the next table that has a microphone can continue, that would be wonderful.
Adria Blahnik.
I'm Cheryl Jenkins, 6th grade math teacher at Freedom Elementary School.
Tracy Giles, Rainbow Valley Kindergarten.
Adria Blahnik, Kindergarten, Blue Horizons.
Stephanie Church, Special Ed Coordinator, District Office.
Lizette Camacho, 3rd grade, Blue Horizons.
Hi, I'm Jen Samland, and I teach 1st grade at Freedom.
Loretta Zumbro. It's on Loretta Zumbro, Technology Integration Coach.
Erica Daniel, Executive Director of School Effectiveness.
Thank you. I am moving to 1.2, purpose and outcomes. Our purpose is to recommend resources that will support and enrich the curriculum, considering the varied interests, abilities, learning styles, and maturity levels of the students we serve. As a committee, we place principle over personal opinion and reason above prejudice in recommending the highest quality resource to ensure a comprehensive collection appropriate for the complete education of all students. Our outcome will be the vendor showcase for Saxon Math. During this meeting, teachers will be trained to pilot the resource. So now I'm moving to 1.3, vendor showcase and teacher training for Saxon Math. The committee will now showcase Saxon Math resources and train teachers on how to use the resources for the pilot. So this is your cue, Jokira. You're good to go.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, I am excited to be here with you this afternoon. I know you've already had a very long day, and you want to get to the meat of this so you can get home to your family, so I certainly understand that. I take it by now most of you have had a chance to sign in. I am going to move past this because I will be giving you at the end of this presentation the Padlet link, and I do have the sign-in link also on there. So if you didn't get a chance to do it before we got started, you can certainly do it afterwards. And you will receive from HMH a email that will have a certificate that you've completed this professional learning. So that's part of why we have the electronic registration there. And so, whoops. That was interesting. My name is Joquita. If you want to take a minute and jot that down, I welcome you to do that. My email is joquita.mckibben@hmhco.com. It's very easy to get in touch with me. I have already shared with your district leaders that I will be more than happy to be available for you for this pilot, so you can get in touch with me and ask questions. And the good news that I have to share with you is I did get an approval to have 2 touch points with you as you're going through this 20-day pilot. So I will be working with your district to set up some times, and we can just do a quick little Q&A, or, just to touch base with you to see how you're doing, if there's anything you're struggling with that I can help you with, because we definitely want to see you be successful with this pilot. And I did ask that we had all of the teachers together to start with. So I'm going to start by going over a little bit of the program pedagogy, and then looking at kind of your lesson order for your pilot, and then talk about how to make Saxon work with that. I am going to share with you that we are going to make this work. We are going to need to be a little creative, but you know what? There's not a more creative person on the universe than educators. So I know we will be able to make that work. So I asked for all of you to start with, and once I go through the pedagogy and then give a little bit of examples for my 5th grade and 6th grade teacher, then we're going to let them step out or go to a back table and work just on doing some planning for about 45-50 minutes while I work with the primary group. And then we'll do a little switch off there and then let our primary teachers do some planning for that last part. The Saxon program, because it's really 3 different programs when you think about it, K to 8, because you do have that hands-on, manipulative-based primary program in K to 3. And then our intermediate books actually start in the 3rd grade. So we do have an overlap in 3rd grade where you can choose, and that goes 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And then we have our course books starting for 6th grade through 8th grade. Our intermediate books and our course books can be trained because of together, because the implementation for all of our textbooks is done the same way. But we do like to separate our primary because it is just a little bit different. I did want to show the picture that I have on the screen here before I move on, just so you can see that if you order, instead of the primary workbooks, which are perfectly fine, just know that if you do choose to go with Saxon as your curriculum and you order the student workbooks, you will need to also order all of the other classroom materials and teacher materials, things like that support the entire curriculum. When you order the primary program using the kit versus the workbooks, then everything comes inclusive. So just wanted to make sure that you knew that as well going in. So let's start with our pedagogy. What I like to do to really explain this is by showing you what Saxon is not. Because I know that you will relate to this, because if you've been teaching 1 year or 20 years, you have taught a math program with this traditional math approach. And that's where we take units and we kind of arrange those units by our domains of our standards. And then within those units, we have some clusters of standards which we organize either by modules or chapters. And so let's look at a visual for that. So you might have your chapter 1, but maybe it's on fractions. We always start out the lesson 1 usually where we came from the previous year, and then you have to work up very quickly, day after day after day after day after day, in difficulty, because we need to be finished with that particular chapter or module within 2 to 3 weeks, because now we need to move on to the next one. And so this goes on throughout the entire school year, where the content is grouped into clusters to where we have that really steep learning curve. And as you know, we usually begin about halfway through the chapter because we've moved so quickly in difficulty that we begin to lose a little bit, a few of our students in our class. And so this is not the way the Saxon approach is. With the Saxon approach, John Saxon, if he were here today, he would tell you that mathematical strands should be connected because math is a connected subject. And so it looks a little bit different in Saxon. Just kind of giving you that visual to compare, you do still see on the left-hand side of your screen, you see beginning of the school year. And then you see end of the school year to the right-hand side. You'll also notice that at the beginning of the school year, you see integrated concepts. And those integrated concepts begin on that easier level, just like lesson 1 in every one of your chapters. But the slope of difficulty is much gradual in the Saxon approach. And so instead of requiring mastery within a 2 to 3 week period with a chapter or a module, we spread that mastery out over time. And so in saying that, if you've read any research on the way the brain learns, you'll know that this is a very much brain-based pedagogy, allowing time for students to master the skills before you move to the next level of difficulty. So let me just kind of give you another little visual example here. So you see, we'll use the same one, fraction, as we had that first chapter there in our traditional approach. So you see how it starts at that easiest level again, usually where they came from the previous year. But here's what I call the secret sauce of Saxon. And that's everything that happens between here and this next level. Because as you can see, we didn't move up in difficulty in fractions. From there to here, we went all the way to here before we came and added the next progression in that skill. And then we go from here all the way over to here again before we add the next level of difficulty. So the secret sauce is what happens in between here and what happens in between here. And that is what we call cumulative practice, where once we teach the next increment, we're going to practice that increment of difficulty for several days before we move into the next progression in that particular standard. And this is a little bit different approach, as you can see. So it's one of those things that we like to say is that the secret of Saxon. So just to give you an example of some of that terminology to use there is we call it an incremental approach. It has cumulative practice, and it is spread out over time. So let me get my pointer back here and we'll move on from there. I can remember how to get on from there. Oops. All right. So thank you for letting me share that with you. Incremental approach, distributed over time, cumulative practice for the entire school year. Now, if I were doing a regular getting started and this wasn't a pilot, this is where I would tell you that Saxon is designed to start at lesson 1, and to teach it in the chronological order that it is written. Because every day you will have a small amount of new information, and then you will practice all of the skills from the beginning of the school year on. Now, so don't get upset and think, oh, well, this isn't going to work for our pilot purposes. It is. I've got some creative ways to help you with that. But I did want you to know the actual design and intent of the pedagogy in case you do decide to adopt this for your curriculum for next year. And so what I'm going to share with you right now, if you have your teacher edition, and I still need everybody there with me. As you can see, I've got a copy of the first grade one on here, and I've got a copy of the fifth grade one. So it doesn't matter what grade level that you have. If you have what's called the planning guide, and you can see this in the planning guide, or you can open volume 1 of your teacher edition. There is a section overview in front of every 10 lessons in your book, in your teacher's edition. However, in the planning guide, and if you'll allow me, I'm going to move over to Think Central, and I understand that you will all have access to Think Central. My primary program, my K-3 teachers, I will share with you that you probably won't use Think Central a lot, but you do have access to it. So one of the things that I've opened in Think Central is the planning guide. When you go to the planning guide, one of the sections of the planning guide is going to say, like your content trace. And so that's where I've gone in the planning guide. So one of the first things that I want you to do, in my 5th and 6th grade teachers, in a few minutes, when you go back and do some planning while I work with the primary, this is where I'd like for you to start. I'd like for you to take out and look at your section overviews. And I want you to just look at what the new concept was for each lesson, starting with lesson 1. But I mean, it is February, and I know that you've been teaching ever since the beginning of the school year. So more than likely, you have covered a lot of the objectives of some of these lessons. So just go down the lesson numbers, and if you come to a lesson number and the objective may be something that you haven't taught or you haven't reviewed yet in your grade level, then just make a little note beside it. For example, if you haven't gone to, this is 5th grade, relationship between multiplication and division, if that's not something you've done, put a little star, a little check, or a little dot by number 19 there. So just kind of make a note by those lesson numbers. And the same thing, this will be our 1st grade. Again, if you actually have, I believe it came with your teacher edition, a hard copy of what's called the planning guide. And you will see this content overview in that planning guide where you can see all of the section overviews in one place. So that'll make it very easy for you to just go through down the lesson numbers and just kind of make a notation by any lesson number that you don't feel like that you have covered the content of that lesson. And I'll share with you in a little bit why that's going to be important. Okay, so that's the first thing to do in your planning. Now, the second thing I want you to do is I want you to look at our focus standards. So I know that every grade level has been given some standards to focus on for Pilot 1 and Pilot 2, and I believe this is Pilot 1. So we're looking at these standards. So I'm just going to take an example here. So here is my 1st grade, and I'm going to jump over here to the 1st grade. Actually, this is the I'm going to look at the 5th grade because then I'm going to let them go. So 1st grade teachers, if you want to, go ahead and start looking at your content overview while I talk to my 5th and 6th grade teacher here a minute. So in 5th grade, here are your standards to focus on. So at this point, I'm going to jump over now to that 5th grade correlation for Saxon. So here's one thing that I noticed and an idea I have for you. I would suggest that you concentrate on one domain at a time for the standard that they've asked you to focus on. So for example, in number and base 10, you have been asked to do 2 different clusters there. So you have a cluster, which has 3 standards in it. Then you have 3A and B. So in that A cluster, you have 5 standards, 6 standards. And then in the B cluster of number and base 10, you have 1 standard. So that's what I would start with first, is that domain. Now let me share with you something I noticed. So in all 6, I looked at these 6 standards, 6 standards here for number and operations in base 10 for cluster A. Now here's one thing that I noticed. Lesson 64, lesson 64, lesson 64, lesson 69, lesson 64. So there's a lot of lessons right around that 64 mark. You'll even see some 66 and 67 and a couple of 68 there. So what I would do is start with lesson 64 for that domain. Now, in saying that, you have to also take in consideration that this first standard had 3 levels of progression before lesson 64. So you might want to pull back up that content trace and see what the objective was for lesson 3, 7, and 52. If it was something that you had not covered, then you might want to do 1 or 2 examples from those lessons before you do teach lesson 64. I know this is going to sound just as plain and clear as mud, but once you dive into it and really begin to absorb and understand and embrace the pedagogy, I think it will make sense for you. So that's where I'm recommending like 5th grade to start. Now here's something else that you'll need to keep in mind is when you look at lesson 64, I think I have that lesson open here. So here's lesson 64. And this is the teacher edition for lesson 64. And so one of the things that I'm going to notice is right from the very first part of the lesson, and I'm going to go over all this with you when you come back with me in a few minutes, but there's 3 main parts of the lesson in the textbook. Power up, new concept, which is where you're going to really focus your main part on, and then you're going to move into the written practice. So when we get to new concept, you'll notice that the student book has the instruction in it. There's not a lot more instruction for the teacher than the students have in the book, which is one of the reasons that this program is so successful, is students can always reference back to lessons and walk themselves through examples and then understand the content. And so very quickly, you would teach the lesson by just walking through in a guided approach, doing that content. Now, I do want to share with you that you may not do every example. So you'll look at the different examples, especially if this is a content that you've previously taught something some of it, you might only do a couple of the examples. The other thing you'll notice then in every lesson is something called lesson practice. Now let me share with you that you'll know right away, this is not the cumulative practice. So when I talk about secret sauce, that is not what this is. This is comprehensive practice on the content that you just taught. Because there may be some days, and I'll jump right back here just to share this again with you. For example, you had a couple of lessons here where it followed right up with like lessons 66 and 67. So it may be that you might want to do one example from 64 and another example from 66, and then we do some of the practice problems from both, and then only the written practice from the second lesson where you taught the new concept. So you're just going to have to, be a little creative with it as you begin to do that. So jumping back to that lesson there, after that comprehensive practice, that's where the written practice starts. Now I'm going to go over this with you again when you get back together, because I spend quite a bit of time on written practice, because the author of these textbooks would tell you if you skip the entire instruction and go straight to written practice, your students will be successful because you can teach the lesson in the written practice. That's how important written practice is. But what's beautiful about this is, as you can see, under every problem number in written practice, there's a number in parentheses. And that number tells you what lesson the content of that example was introduced in. And so that's why I had you go first to your content overview here and identify lessons that you don't think that you have covered thus far in the school year. So for example, if I was in this lesson and teaching it, and lesson 52 was a lesson that I had identified on my section overview as a lesson that we might not have covered, then when I assign problems from this written practice, I'm going to have students put an X on number 1, so they wouldn't do number 1. Lesson 11 was fine. Lesson 49 was fine. 21. As you can see, every one of these are coming from different lessons. Now, let me remind you, this is lesson 64. And so I'm just going to kind of scroll down and just give you an example here. You see 3 problems out of 30 from the day you taught the lesson. Everything else is cumulative practice. So that's where, while you can jump around a little bit and teach the new concepts, you have to be very selective in your written practice and not assign problems from the written practice if you're not sure that the students are capable of doing that. So that's another reason why that I wanted you to kind of make note of which lessons you think that maybe you haven't covered thus far in the curriculum that you have been teaching. Okay? All right. So one other thing I'm going to just kind of talk with you about is you'll notice if you've looked, and by the way, my primary teachers, if you'll come back with us now, because what I'm going to tell you now really applies to everybody. Another suggestion I have is for you to start out day 1 by giving a couple of the assessments, because your assessments are also cumulative. And so I did a little bit of math myself, because I know in our textbooks, it takes about 155 days to finish one of our textbooks. And so teachers using the Saxon textbooks would be somewhere around lesson 85 at this point in the school year. And so if you jumped right on over to lesson 85 in your content overview there, you would notice that you were giving an assessment after lesson 85. Now, what I did is I want to share with you this as well, because you'll notice that you have an assessment after every 5th lesson. You see that? Cumulative assessment, cumulative assessment. So after every 5th lesson, you have an assessment. But none of the 5 lessons before that cumulative assessment are covered on that cumulative assessment. So if you adopt this program next year, your first assessment won't be until after lesson 10. And it will only be assessing content from lessons 1 through 5. So the 5 lessons prior to the assessment, that content isn't covered, because we want students to have like 10 opportunities to practice something before we are assessing them for mastery. All right, so this said, if we were in our textbook, I'm going to recommend, and I actually put this on a slide here for you, so let me toggle over here. So if we're in the primary program, you're my kindergarten, 1st grade, and 3rd grade teacher, it takes about 160 days to complete the primary program. So you would be somewhere by this point in February around lesson 80, which means you 80-2, that's all of your assessments are going to be on a -2 lesson. So for every 10th lesson and 5th lesson interval, you're going to have like 80.1, 80.2, 85.1, 85.2, that kind of thing. So what I'm recommending is you actually give a couple of assessments, and say they do well with 80 and they get everything correct, then you could actually jump back up to like lesson 75 and feel pretty confident that your students are ready just to kind of move forward with the progression. What I'm going to recommend for my Intermediate 5 and my Course 1 book is to give cumulative tests 15 and 13. Now, I skipped 14 because I wanted you to have a lot of variety there on the test items. And so 2 tests simultaneously might have more of the same types of content than 2 that are 10 days apart. And so giving those 2. Now, for my intermediate and course book, I want to share with you one other resource that you have that my primary teachers do not have, and that is something called an individual test analysis form. And I know you're going to ask me, Joita, where do we find that? It will be located in your assessment guide. And so I'm not sure if you ordered all of the teacher materials or just the teacher manuals. If you ordered all the teacher materials, you should have an assessment guide booklet that came with them. If not, no worries, because all of that is online. Matter of fact, this one that I'm showing you, I pulled up right from the assessment guide right off of Think Central. When you're on the Think Central home page, no matter what grade level you're on, you're going to see an assessment guide right here in your carousel of resources. And so when I jump back to that, just making sure that you see the purpose of it is, say I gave lesson assessment 13, and maybe I had a student that missed number 5, And then they also missed number, let's say they missed number 9, or, you would know, okay, number 9 came from lesson 69. Number 5 came from lesson 33. They might have also missed another problem in 13, and you can look to see which lesson it came from. And then you would know if they're struggling on those particular lessons when you are ready to do the written practice again, as we were in that for that written practice. You would know not to assign those problems in written practice. The other thing, say I had a student that over a period of time is missing one of the same problems from the same lesson number, then I might want to go and pull the reteaching. And I just pulled this one because I gave that example that they missed number 5 from that lesson assessment 13, and that came from lesson 33. Well, I might want to come in here and print this lesson 33 reteach, and what it does is condenses the actual teaching of the lesson, and then gives again, comprehensive practice of that content. Now, let me also share this idea with you. So let's jump back over here, and this is for both my textbook and primary. It may be that on some days you're going to teach 2 new concepts of the lessons. And if you're doing that, you may choose, my textbook people have a reteaching for every single day. So it may be that instead of using the new concept information from the student book, I'm going to use it from the reteaching, because again, it's condensed, and I can teach from the top part of the reteaching. Say if I was going to do lessons 64 and 66, so I'm just going to teach from the reteaching. Then we're going to do the comprehensive practice. Then I might only do the written practice from the second day's lesson. Whew, I know that was a lot of information. And so before I let my textbook teachers go plan for a few minutes, I want to see if you have any questions before I work with the primary teachers. Everybody good?
Yeah, they're good.
Okay, perfect. And so my 5th grade teacher and my course 1 teacher, if you want to go and maybe start on some of those things that I just suggested, especially starting in that content trace there, looking at the different content in the lessons, maybe making note of the one that you don't think you have covered thus far in the school year, that's a great place for you to start. Okay, perfect. All right, so now I have my primary teachers. So for my primary teachers, I'm just going to do a couple of quick examples here and I'm going to use the 1st grade, just kind of middle of the road. I have kindergarten, the 1st grade, and 3rd grade there. So when you're looking at the Saxon correlation, I don't want you to worry about looking at the maintenance part. You'll notice you're going to see the math meeting mentioned a lot, and you'll also notice when you see the math meeting that it's used a lot for reviewing content. There's nothing new that's added in the math meeting that you haven't already taught. You may add some new resources to your math meeting all along the school year, but it will be on content that you have just taught. So if you've taught in your new concept something new that from that day on, you're going to be adding to the math meeting, you will introduce it during that day's new concept or the next day during the math meeting. So the resource may be new, but the content won't be new. So I know you have access to this correlation, so what I'm going to share with you is to focus solely on what the instruction says. And so we're going to look at this first one. You have the domain numbers in base 10, and you have the cluster C here, and you also have 2 standards in that cluster. So kind of the same thing I did with the 5th grade. So I'm going to look at my new concepts here. And so if you'll notice, I see lesson 84 in new concept here. I also see lesson 84 and 85 and 86 here. So there's 3 lessons kind of back to back for this particular cluster. But just as I shared with the textbook teachers, I think 84 is probably a good place for you to start for this particular cluster of these 2 standards. However, I want you to go back and look at your table of contents and look at the objective for lesson 32, 34, 56. If any of those has a lesson content, like your I can statement for that lesson, if it's something that you haven't taught thus far this school year, then you might want to go back and teach just that little snippet of new concept in that lesson. But I'm thinking that the 84, 85, 86, that's going to be a good place for you to focus on for covering these 2 standards. Now, you're going to need to do the same thing that we did in our, the same thing we did that I showed the textbooks. Let me see if I can find my lesson 84 that I had open for you also. I know I can close out some of this 5th grade stuff that I was showing so we can get here. All right. All right, so here's lesson 84. Unlike the textbooks where they have 3 parts of their lesson, in the primary program, you have 4 parts. So your first part is called the math meeting. Now, for the purposes of your pilot, you are not going to implement the math meeting fully. Because again, this is a 20-day, I want you to think about it like this. We want you to get the flavor of Saxon, a little flavor of its pedagogy, and understanding how, if we use this curriculum to fidelity, it would lead to mastery and success. And so just keeping that in mind is for this purpose of a 20-day pilot, I want you to do any of the math meeting components that you think you can do quickly without a lot of prep time for getting resources ready, then, go ahead and implement those. So let me give you some examples of that. One other thing, this is a 1st grade, 3rd grade, you have the same thing. You will have what's called the pattern of the day. And so this is something very easy. You could write on the board and you could still do that part of the math meeting. Now, something that you may not want to do because you may not have taught, all of your money content yet. But in Saxon, we do a lot with money, a lot with place value, a lot with time, a lot with calendar math. I mean, any math concept we can integrate, you're going to see it done all through the different strands of mathematics. So what I'm asking you to do is, for your math meeting, is just take a quick look at it. If it's something that you can implement quickly without having to do a lot of work, then sure, go ahead and do that. So for example, I probably wouldn't worry about the calendaring because it's already February. I've already set a routine for that. My children are already familiar with my procedure for calendaring every morning. So I probably wouldn't change that. But something like counting, I will share with you, this program does a jam-up job of skip counting. And when I train Saxon teachers, I tell them, never, ever, 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 ever omit the skip counting. Because if you've done that, how it's written in there in our primary program, it just is the gateway to multiplication. And students really have no problem moving right into that and moving into multiplication with automaticity. Okay, so for example, it says count by 5s to 50. Easy peasy, we could do that. Count by 10s to 100. Then count backwards by 10s from 100 to 10. Say the even numbers from 0 to 20. So if you haven't taught this yet, you can still do that. Put you a skip counting strip up that has 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and then just have somebody pointing to it as we quickly count that. Same thing from my odd numbers. And by the way, we use our even and odd skip counting for our strategy of teaching +2 and take away -2. And so if they know that skip counting, when they get to +2 and -2, they quickly know, oh, it's the number before or the number after on that skip counting strip. And so that's just one example there. Look at this. Today's count is from 57 to 75. So boys and girls, tell me what is the number before 57. And then you're using your 100 number chart. You probably all have a 100 number chart in there. So this would be an easy one you could implement. And same thing, what number comes after 75? Then you put that sticky note there, and now they're going to use and count from the numbers in between. And so, but here's the cool part about that. After you've done that, ask 3 children to name an even number between the covered numbers. And then add another number to the number line for the days spent in the school year. Okay, so see, those are easy things that you could do. There's that pattern I was sharing with you. I would not worry about weather graph or lunch attendance. Clock, you probably all have a Judy clock in your room. If you haven't taught it yet, then you might not want to implement that as part of your math meeting. Same thing about your coins. But as you can see, there were several things in that math meeting that I could do without me having to use a lot of time to get those resources ready. 100 number chart and some skip counting strips really was all I needed to have up, and then write that pattern of the day on my board. Okay, the second part of the primary lesson is the fact practice. Now, the reason I'm kind of showing you this lesson is because I've asked you to start with lesson 84. So you would also need to know, because the fact practice that goes with lesson 84 is doubles plus 1. If you haven't taught that yet in first grade, then you wouldn't want to do that part of the fact practice. And you would just simply do the few things in math meeting you could do, and then start here with the new concept. Now, here's where I'm going to tell you that this program differs from some of your other primary math programs. It's not going to suggest in your teacher margin wrap that if you want to enhance the lesson, to give every student a bag of objects. On the very first page of this lesson, it's going to tell you to the night before to get a Ziploc bag for every student in your room and fill it with 60 to 100 similar objects. Let me tell you a little secret. When I taught this program, I always made sure I was like one day behind my co-teacher, and then that way she would already have these Ziploc bags filled with beans or elbow macaroni or whatever it was, buttons, whatever we were going to count. And so I'd just say, can I borrow your Ziploc bags with your counters? But anyway, just know that this is a program where every child has that at their desk as you're going through the new concept. And that's something else that I'll share with you is even in that planning guide that I've already had you pull out and look at, there is a page section on materials. And that is going to include any manipulative and anything extra that may not be in your manipulative kit. For example, Ziploc bags with 60 to 100 counting objects in it. And so there will be some times where you'll need to bring, one time in second grade, I had to bring a pair of socks from home. So there's different things. A lot of times it's going to be things you'll need, you have in your classroom, like paper clips or eraser or something like that. So it'll be easy to, pull those materials together. But we use a lot of hands-on. You should have received this math office as if you ordered, I believe you ordered like 24 individual student workbooks. So you should have received for every first grader, one math office came with one workbook. And you're going to use that math office in this lesson as a work map for them to organize their objects in groups of 10. And so that's the purpose, of course, of this entire lesson there. And so that's how quickly you walk through that. And then you get to written practice. And so this is a place where you'll, just like I shared with the fifth grade and course one teacher, that you'll need to look at that written practice to see if there are any problems on here that you might not have taught yet. But you have a little bit of an advantage because yours is completely 100% guided class practice. So if there may be something on here that you haven't taught yet, then use this worksheet as an opportunity to introduce that to your students. And so it is okay if you want to just X out number 2, or if you want to just walk through it with them. By the way, you can project that student workbook. If you want to put one of those pages under your document camera and project it, and then have students coming to the board and writing on it as you're doing that together. But you're just going to need to be creative with the written practice part, because remember, while this is lesson 84, it may have content all the way up from lesson 1 through 83 on it. There will only be one problem. Where I showed the 5th grade, they had 3 problems in the lesson that I showed them for the lesson I recommended they start on. You have 1. You will only have 1 problem for each day's content that you just taught. And I had teachers that challenged me a little bit in my early days with Saxon. By the way, I didn't share with you at the beginning of this presentation that I actually taught Saxon for a number of years. I had 3 children that grew up on Saxon, all the way from the kindergarten program to the Algebra 1 book. And now I'm in, oh my goodness, I'm going to tell my age here, about 24 years of sharing this. And I've actually worked in 46 states of the United States spreading Saxon. So very much a proponent of it. And I'm so excited to be working with you for the next few weeks as you go through this pilot. Okay, so that's just kind of an example of some strategies to use for a getting started place. And I want to just jump down quickly to this next standard of focus, because this is going to be an easy one for you. Because if you'll look here, you just really have the two standards. And also, you have lesson 62, lesson 62, lesson 62. So you see lesson 62 in every example here. So that's a good one to use. You also have 95 in both of those. So teaching lesson 62 and 95-2, that's going to give you the instruction that you need to focus on for these two standards. So that one makes it a little bit easier for you. I did want to just quickly share this. If you look at the number in base 10 and you look at that cluster A, for example, for first grade, look how many lessons in the new concept that we continue to add on to. Because as you know, we have to have that number in base 10 as a solid foundation in first grade, because we do so much building on that in second and third grade and even fourth grade. And so it is covered very much so in first grade. Now, I would venture to say you have already taught this skill. It's counting to 120 by ones, twos, tens, starting at any number less than 100. And of course, we do a lot of that in the math meeting. And so, you know, you'll see, look at this, lessons 1 through 135. It is actually maintained in our math meeting. The counting pattern is in 31 through 135. So you know, sometimes when teachers think, oh my goodness, you only had one problem to practice what I just taught them. I said, yes, we only had one today. But we're also going to have a couple tomorrow, because we're going to do it in math meeting and we're going to do it in our guided practice, and they're going to go home and do it on their homework practice. And so the Saxon approach is that you're going to have as many opportunities, if not more, to practice that content, but we spread it out over time. Remember the saying, mastery over time? Because here's something else to kind of wrap your head around is, if you do the same type of problem during the same setting of time, the neurons in the brain only fire one time. But if you practice that one problem today, and then again tonight when they go home, and then again tomorrow, then the neurons in the brain have fired 3 times. And those neurons must fire a certain number of times to move that learning from new learning to long-term mastery. And so just kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about those practice opportunities there. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to now jump back to our session here, and just I've already talked about those 4 parts of the lesson, but very quickly I'm just going to tell you a couple more just little bitty things about math meeting, because I know that's not going to be your main focus, but I did want you to see what it looks like. And so, for example, you will receive in their dry erasable on very high quality material. You'll use it all year long. And so you'll see things like problem of the day, pattern of the day, money, time, temperature, you know, lots of counting. So those are some of those things that you're going to do, and do quickly as you move through. Again, go ahead and put your skip counting up. That is something you could do. I really do challenge all of you to at least do the counting section of the math meeting, because I think that's a section you could easily implement. If you would like to see the components that come in your grade level for the math meeting, this is a page from your program overview. So what I'd like to ask you to do is write on your notes there, write down read program overview. It will be located in volume 1 of your teacher manual. Because today, I don't have a lot of time with you. Matter of fact, we only have about 10 more minutes, and then I need to jump over and switch hats back to my textbooks. And so I promise you this program overview will have most everything in it that you need to begin implementing the program. One other little thing I wanted to make sure you know is, while I mentioned with the first grade that they're going to get a meeting master, third grade, you're going to get a Saxon Math folder, which will also have a lot of resources in it. Also in third grade, and you're going to see these because they probably came. If you ordered the workbook, you probably got a set of meeting worksheets for that student workbook, because this is an example of the third grade one. While we're doing a lot of that math meeting orally, we want all children engaged. And so they do have a meeting worksheet that goes along with the math meeting. I just real quickly, because sometimes kindergarten gets left out, this is just kind of an example of your math meeting. It's totally different, where the first grade and third grade, you're going to see math meeting on every day's lesson. Where in kindergarten, you're going to have a separate booklet for your math meeting, because we usually have one for the first day of the month and then one for the second day and the rest of the month. And so you'll use that same booklet until you introduce a new month, and it'll just kind of walk you through that. You're going to have a number line that grows. It's color coded, but it's just a beautiful approach the way they do the kindergarten. So if my kindergarten teacher's there, I know you have your manuals. If you want to look right before your lessons, you're going to see something called meeting overview, and it's going to be a 3-fold cardboard that really explains your math meeting. Okay, quickly, the second part of the lesson is going to be that fact practice. Nobody does fact practice like Saxon Math. We are going to make sure students have multimodality approach, because they're never going to move it to long-term memory until they have a time to practice it in their preferred learning modality. So they're going to hear it, see it, say it, move with it with Saxon Math. So if you're first grade and third grade, you're going to get wrap-ups. In first grade, you're going to get student fact cards. In first grade and third grade, you're going to get teacher fact cards. You're also going to get a worksheet every day that we do recommend timing. You may not want to do that for the 20-day period. You may just let students work at their own pace and then come back and check it, because you haven't taught the facts in the sequential order of introducing the sets as Saxon has instructed you to do. So at this point, I think I would just kind of continue with how I've been doing it thus far this school year. Third grade only, you're also going to have something fun called an oral fact practice, where students fold this paper and they do an oral fact practice together with their neighbor. And so you're going to, the fact worksheets are several different types. We don't have the same type because we don't want them, to memorize those answers. In kindergarten, you don't necessarily have fact practice. Yours is called number practice. And you're going to see it progress along the school year all the way to writing some equations. So they'll go from that one-to-one mastery to equations there. Whew, that brings us to new concepts. I've already told you this, but you have to have the manipulatives. Also, in that program overview that you're going to read for me, if you need to know what manipulatives are required for your grade level and the amount of manipulatives needed for a full class, that is in your program overview by grade level. And if that's something that I need to help you find a little bit later, I'll be more than happy to do that. You will want to get your manipulatives organized and ready to go. And of course, you're going to do a much jam up job doing that for next year when we know the full manipulatives that will be needed there. I've been through the lesson there with you. Just know, while it is written out for you, it is not intended for you to read it. Read over it and then phrase the questions as the guide is, suggesting, but you will very easily be able to just go with the lesson from the at a glance pictures on the side. I already talked about this guided practice. Just make sure you don't have them do any problems that you haven't taught the content of thus far. The back side is a mirrored image to the guided side that you do with them in class, and that is recommended to send home. However, if you want to keep it and do it for bell work the next morning, that's okay as well. You do have math centers that are suggested that go with this program. I know our account executive is working on a cost proposal for you. She wrote me about the learning palettes that you see on the screen there today. You are more than welcome to do one of the written practices, the written assessments, maybe halfway in between, or I suggested you start with that to give you an indication of where your students are in the sequential order of that Saxon. Next year, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but you will use a rubric for actually assigning a grade, because the problems are weighted based on the number of opportunities they've had to practice. So during this pilot, you won't need to worry about that so much, because they're not going to have had all those opportunities to practice. So I don't know that I would score it in a way to use for their grade, but it would certainly be formative for you in a way to understand the Saxon pedagogy a little bit better. So at this time, if you would, on your notes, go ahead and jot this down, Padlet.com, and then it's /McKibben/Saxon Math. And once you have that written down, and once you get on your computers, because you did not need your computers for this training, but once you do and you actually go to that Padlet, I do recommend you bookmark it. I told you earlier, if you did not have a chance to sign in at the beginning of this session, here's the link to do that. But I also want you to write this down. Read the Professional Learning Guide. And I do have that opened already for you to the contents of it. The left-hand side of this contents would be the guide for kindergarten, first, and third grade. And you're going to see something down here called Helpful Instructional Tips. And so that's a beautiful thing to look at, because it'll definitely give you some tips on, kind of getting started with Saxon Math. But I do want to point out that this is a beautiful booklet that's designed by teachers to help you to get started with Saxon. So it's another resource for you while you're waiting for our next touch point with me. I've already shared with you about Think Central. And so again, in kindergarten and first and third grade, they don't use it a lot other than maybe to pull up some materials when you're at home, if you want to do planning or reading over your lesson and that sort of thing. Okay? All right. So what questions do you have for me before I switch into my other costume and bring our textbook teachers back? How are we doing? Any questions there? I know that was fast and furious, and I know you have a lot of questions. And so that's why I am going to be kind of tied with you for the next few weeks, just to make sure you get off to a good start and you get all your questions answered. Okay. Well, at this point, my primary teachers, you see on the screen a session feedback. I'm not going to have you waste your time right now to do that, because also on that Padlet screen, you will see where that feedback is right down at the bottom of this very first column. And if you would take some time, you can do it today or one day out, maybe tomorrow, or if you want to wait till after we've had our first touch point, that's okay as well, because I know you're going to have questions at that point. Okay, so if somebody would give me a thumbs up when I have my textbook teachers back.
Your textbook teachers are in the room primary. If you want to go into the other room to work, you may as well. I will take you into the conference room.
Before anybody does that, we have blocked Padlet, and I need to unblock Padlet, so you're not going to be able to get to it tonight. So I'll work on that, and I'll let you know whenever I have unblocked Padlet.
Sounds perfect.
We are ready for the next group.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Well, how did your planning session go? Anybody want to share, or if you have questions before we get started, as far as, kind of a starting place to launch into this? I understand, if I'm correct, my Course 1 teacher, you have some experience with Saxon. Would you like to share with me what that experience is? Okay. Well, we're going to jump in and get rolling here. You've already looked, we've already kind of just briefly went through a lesson, so you saw the 3 parts of the lesson. But before I go any further, I want you to look at the pie graph that I have on the screen, dividing the 3 parts. So if you would please tell me which part of the lesson has the most amount of time devoted to it. And you can just shout it out. Maybe I'll hear you.
Practice. Written practice.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You're exactly right. It is the written practice. As a matter of fact, you'll notice it is half of your math block should be devoted to that written practice. And I already mentioned earlier that our author would tell you that again, that is where you'll hear teachers say that's the secret sauce of Saxon. And because it is that continual practice. So we're just going to quickly go through these parts of the lesson. One of the things I want to, draw your attention to, obviously, is the fact practice. I do have a question for you. I noticed on your cost proposal that we ordered the fact practice workbook for the Intermediate 5 book. I saw a different type of workbook for the Course 1 book. So could you did course 1, did you not get the fact practice workbook?
Okay, so we are going to just show you what we got.
Perfect.
All right, so for 5th grade, we have Volume 1 Teacher Manual and Volume 2 Teacher Manual. And then there are consumables. Hold on. We need to get to the box. Okay, so we have Power Up books. That's it. Those are all Power Up books.
But what grade level is that?
So that's 5th grade. And
Yeah,
then
I saw-
for 6th grade. Okay, we also have the actual hardcover textbook student edition. And then 6th grade has packs of 10 activity books, and then she has 1 copy of the student edition hardcover and volume 2 of the TE.
Okay, so that was my other question, is you didn't order the student edition, so what were you planning for the students to use?
We did not specify what we wanted. We asked the consultant because we're not familiar with the program. This is what was sent to us based on the grade levels we provided and based on the standards that were on our curriculum overview and pacing guide. That's the extent of the input that we had in selecting the resources we would need for the pilot.
Okay. And that I was kind of confused by that when I saw the cost proposal, because it looked like you got 1 student edition for intermediate 5 and 1 student edition for course 1.
She said that, if I remember correctly, the conversation was that it would be extremely expensive just to purchase the hardcovers for the pilot.
Yes.
So her suggestion was to access information online.
Okay.
I
right.
just
So,
reached out to the consultant.
And I do know, so you will have to then set up your classes and actually add the students in there, because the students are going to need to access that student edition also from home.
Okay, so how would we know how to set it up?
And that's going to be in Think Central. It's not hard. It does require a little time, though, to do that. And so what we can do, and before that, until we get ready for that, I'm going to show you a resource called Saxon Adaptations. And you can maybe copy that until we get all of your classes set up to where the students have their login and they can actually access the textbook online. So I'm making a note of this, and because I'm going to follow back up with you and set up another time for us to get together. And that may be something that we just do together while I'm with you the next time.
We are a Clever district, so if we
Okay.
have Clever logins for these pilot classrooms, we could use that as well.
Okay, and that's something I can look into as far as getting Think Central, where they can just log into Think Central right through Clever. Okay? All right. Well,
Yeah,
we're
our
going to go
goal-
ahead and
I guess my only thing is for 5th and 6th grade, not so much of a concern for kinder through 3rd, because they seem to have everything they need. But our plan was for them to start the pilot on Monday. We are a 4-day week. So I just want to make sure they're prepared. I reached out to Casey because our 6th grade teacher does not have the demo account login unless you can provide it. But I just emailed her, and she's usually pretty quick responding, but then this may be after hours for her too.
Yes, and I wondered about that because it's on a different platform. It's
Okay.
on an old platform called HRW. And so I wondered about that. So I'm going to also follow up with Casey on that again tomorrow too. But I am going to give you the adaptations for course one, it's actually a link to it on my Padlet. And so we'll probably just have the teachers start Monday using those. And that's going to be, it's actually a good way to transition students into Saxon, because it's kind of a soft approach moving into it, especially middle of the year. And you'll see what I mean in just a few minutes when I explain that resource, okay? All right, so let me tell, but I also want to make sure that you know you did order this workbook right here. So every student does have one of these, and they do use one sheet out of that workbook every day. But I did not see that for the course book. And so that's something else for next year. I do know that Casey's working on a cost proposal for like what you would need for everything for next year. And I'm going to review that with her just to make sure we do have all the resources that you need. So I'm going to definitely look at that as well. But here's the beautiful part about this is these are all, you have rights to photocopy these. And so they're all on the teacher site, and so they can copy those as they're needed. And so we're not going to worry about that workbook for the pilot. However, for next year, if you do choose to adopt Saxon, we want to make sure that that's on there. And so one thing that I love to do is I love to have just a folder for my students that just says Power Up. Matter of fact, I've got one right here that you can kind of see. If I hold it up, it looks just like the one that you're looking at there on the screen. But when you open it up on the inside, I have the tracking chart. And one thing that I would probably recommend you do for a 20-day period, I don't know that I would skip around, even though it's in regular Saxon, it is. But what I would do is choose one of these sets of facts that are on there. I believe the example that you see there on the screen, and the example I have in my hand is an intermediate 5 one. And so if you have taught improper fractions already, that might be a good one to start with, which is fact practice H. And so just do that every single day and let the students see how much they're improving day after day after day. Because as you can see, you are supposed to have students say, okay, boys and girls, get out your fact practice progress chart. Let's see how long it took you to do it yesterday and how many you got correct. So everybody sets their own individual goal. And so, for example, this child yesterday in a minute's time got all 20 correct. So their goal today would be, again, to get 20 correct, but to do it in 58 seconds. And so that way they're only racing against their self, and they're not competing against their neighbor. At that point, then they're going to go. And you will, as a teacher, want to have some kind of counter that's going to count up. So when the student does finish, they look at your counter and they write the time on top of their Power Up worksheet. And then after it's corrected, because that's the next thing you'll do, is project those answers and then make sure that they get all the answers corrected on their sheet. Then they're going to open their folder back up and they record today's time. And so, for example, you can see that this child actually got 59 seconds and had 19 correctly. I see they had 18 correct the last time. So they did it in 1 second less, but they got one more correct than they did the day before. So I'm going to leave that as an option for you. You might want to choose maybe 2 or 3 of these, and maybe even division, because that might be a big one to do as well. So just pick a couple of them and then alternate those every other day. and then kind of see how they are progressing as you go through that 20-day pilot. Next year, you'll see that you're going to do a certain number of A's, B's, C's, and they're actually in the order in the workbook that you do them in. The next part of that worksheet, the facts are at the top. The second part of the worksheet that you see there is the mental math. And the thing about the mental math is you are really encouraging your students to do it mentally. You'll notice, if I turn back to that worksheet, you'll notice that it only has just a very small amount of room for them to actually write the answers. And so we want them to look at the problem or listen to the problem. This is something else that you might do since you don't have the student book, because a lot of times our teachers won't even tell them to open the student book until they've finished or are ready to do the problem of the day. And so the mental math, the teacher may just quickly be saying, A, 1 centimeter equals how many millimeters? B, 1 meter equals how many centimeters? C. And so they're just very quickly going through that. They're jotting their answers down. Then you're going to come back and check them very quickly. Everything in Power Up is going to be from previous lessons. So you're not going to really have any new learning there. Then every day you will also do a problem of the day. And so the nice thing about that is the whole last section of their Power Up worksheet is for their problem. And it breaks it out into the 4 parts of the problem-solving process. Understand, plan, solve, and check. And so you're going to first read the problem. What do you know about the problem? And we're going to jot that information there. What does the problem ask us to do? We're going to put that there. Now let's talk about a plan. And in our plan, we're going to think about what problem-solving strategy that we're going to use. And it may be that you don't want to implement the problem of the day for your pilot, and I can understand that since you're starting in February. Just know that every lesson in your teacher's edition, you have this page right before the Power Up, and it's going to give you a detailed step-by-step instruction for leading your students through that problem of the day. It also gives you the focus strategy that the books suggest. Now, that doesn't mean the students have to use that strategy. They may have used one of their own. I do want you to know, if you've got your book right there, if you turn to the lesson right before lesson 1, it's called a problem-solving lesson. And that is where you will introduce the 4 steps of the problem-solving process, and you will also introduce all of these strategies. I also take these and I put them in my folder where my Power Up folder, where my students can see those strategies every day when we're doing that problem of the day. So again, that may be one part that you eliminate during the pilot because you haven't taught that problem-solving lesson, or you may want to take one day and teach that to allow you to implement that problem in the subsequent lessons that you teach. I think either way will be fine with the purpose of this pilot. Again, we're just wanting you to get a nice flavor of Saxon. So that's the Power Up section. The next section is your new concept. So this is where you'll teach the new increment. And I shared with you already earlier that the new increment is going to have a set of examples. If you are doing a couple of lessons together, Remember we talked about maybe doing 64 and 66 together? Then I would do the power up for 64. I would teach the new concept for 64 and 67, but maybe not every example. Maybe a couple of examples on each lesson. And then I would do the written practice for the second lesson, like 67. So if you decide to do it that way to try to teach more content, then that's how I would recommend. First part of the lesson from the first lesson you're teaching. Both new concepts from both lessons, but maybe not every example from both lessons. And then the written practice, which is the third part of the lesson, from the second lesson. And we can go over that again when we have our Q&A follow-up. Then right under those examples, you're going to see that lesson practice. And you probably remember I shared with you this earlier. After the examples, you have comprehensive practice. Now that means this is focused practice on what you just taught. We do not expect mastery. You don't sit there and go over it and over it and over it and over it. You're just whetting their appetite a little bit, giving them a little chance to practice what you just taught them. And then making sure that they know it's okay. If you didn't get it today, guess what? You're going to have 2 problems tomorrow, and 2 problems the next day, and 2 problems the next day. We'll get it over time. So really, this is just quick. It's okay if you want to do ACE. You want to maybe have this side of the room do half, that side of the room. Then we're going to quickly go over our answers. Just be creative with that. Because, remember what I shared with you? The whole reason to teach this program is to get right here to written practice. So remember that I shared with you about the number in parentheses under the lesson number. And so I showed you that one example, like we were going to teach lesson 64 first, but only 3 problems from the written practice came from 64. And so here's what the way that this is designed to be taught. So let me tell you what not to do. You never, ever, ever want to send home the 30 problems for homework. The majority of the written practice must always be completed in class. Saxon is really a program where you can do individualized instruction every single day. Because of this cumulative practice, because it may be that I need help with number 2, my neighbor needs help with number 7, and so the teacher, because students always have something they can do on this, and they are going to skip around and do problems that they know how to do and wait on the teacher to circle back around and help them with a problem that they need help on. Now, that said, let me share this with you. You absolutely have to work in boxed paper. That means the students have to have a piece of paper divided into 15 boxes on one side, 15 on the back side. My son's 5th grade teacher, she actually used 2 sheets of paper. And the way she taught them to do it, they had 12 boxes because she wanted them a little bigger, 12 on the back, and then 6 more on the second page, and they stapled it together. That's okay. You do it. You be creative with that. We do have an actual boxed worksheet that you can copy and have for your students to work in. Now, let me share with you the way this is designed to be taught. I would say, boys and girls, Miss McKibben's going to do some of these with you. So remember when I told you that the author said you could teach the lesson in written practice? Well, let's go back to that lesson 64 example. How many problems were there? 3. And they were all 3 back to back, but I think they were like problems 7, 8, and 9. So it may be that if you don't get to every example in the new concept, then work out the problem with them on written practice, and they're doing it with you in their box paper. So it may be, I'm going to start with number 6. Boys and girls, I need every pencil in number 6. Let's look at what it's asking us to do. And so we're going to do that together. Now, here's the way the program is designed is you never grade written practice. Now, you do look at it for accuracy and for completion. And so once you are, and by the way, they check it themselves. So once it's turned into you, it's already checked for the ones that they miss. So they do that for you. And you're just quickly looking at it, and you make note of the ones that they missed. Say I had several students that missed number 4. Well, I'm going to go back in my teacher's edition. I look at number 4. It tells me it comes from what lesson? Lesson 21. Guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to look at tomorrow's lesson that I'm going to teach. I'm going to go to the written practice. I'm going to find a problem in written practice from lesson 21, and I'm going to put a sticky note there by written practice, and I'm going to write that problem number. It might have been number 9. Well, I'll write that on my sticky note because I know I have students that are struggling with that. But here's the beauty part of this. They do this written practice. They score it themselves. You're just analyzing it to look to see potential challenges students are having. And then you find sibling problems going forward and use those to reteach. And it doesn't waste anybody's time because everybody has to do those sibling problems in those subsequent lessons. And so, again, the thing that you want to keep in mind when you get to written practice, remember, it's half of your math period, so you've got time to do this. You're going to work with them anywhere from 6 to 10 problems. Because this is a pilot and you're jumping in and starting in a midpoint somewhere, you may want to do about 10 problems with them. And here's a way to know which problems to do. You see how some problems have an asterisk by them? That is letting you know that that problem is from the most recent lessons. Probably within the 5 recent lessons. So your students have not had much of an opportunity to practice it. So that's a good one for me to do with them. Another type problem that's good to do with them are problems that have bubbles. So you see here, represent, connect, any of the higher order thinking problems, you're going to see those call out bubbles. And so those are also great problems to do a couple with them. And so now, and then the other thing you do is look at the ones that they missed from the day before and the day before and find some of those sibling problems. And that's why, like right before, I've got a teacher's edition here. This is my sticky note that was right on written practice. And it has the lesson, the problem numbers that I'm going to do with them. Now, I keep these sticky notes in the next 5 lessons because you may not find a problem in the next lesson, but probably you will somewhere in the next 5 lessons. And so I just keep those sticky notes going, and I may not be able to remediate and reteach from yesterday's lesson with a sibling problem today, but I may be able to do it tomorrow, the next day. And so that's how you find those problems. Now, you've done about 10 problems with them. Now it's their turn to work independently. But you tell them, boys and girls, I want you to do the problems that you think you might need Miss McKibben's help with. And so it's okay for them to skip around. And I tell my boys and girls, if it's easy peasy, skip it till tomorrow, till you get home. That way you can get finished on the bus on the way home. You're already finished. So you want them to leave your room with the problems that they can do independently. So that's the whole goal of written practice. I'm doing somewhere between 7 to 10 with them. They're going to do about 10 to 12 problems independently. They're taking home somewhere around 6 or 7 problems to do independently at home. When they're working in class independently, they just indicate to you if they need you to help them. You should have a set pathway in your classroom. Another thing I always did as I was going around, if none of my students had raised their hand, I had a highlighter. And on that box paper where the number was on the box, if it was correct, I just put I highlighted the number. Also, my students all had a highlighter. The 10 problems I do with them, they highlight those numbers. So tomorrow when they come to class, I have up the answers for written practice from yesterday. But guess what? They only have to check the ones that they don't have highlighted in their boxes. If they miss a problem, I have them draw an outline with their highlighter around the entire box. And then that way I know when I look up and I see a written practice from yesterday and it's got the whole box highlighted, that's the first place I'm going to go when I release them to work independently. And I'll say, I see you missed something from yesterday. Do you need help with that? And no, ma'am, I've got that figured out. Or, yes, ma'am, I'm not sure what I did wrong. And so we're going to sit down and work through that, okay? But that's just a good way of helping the time to go quicker, is if they've already got over half of their problems are already highlighted, then tomorrow they only have to check the ones that the number's not highlighted. And that's how those boxes, just right on the number, I just put a dot. And then the next day, if they miss it, they just highlight the entire box with their highlighter. They have to keep that highlighter in their math notebook. You will have an investigation lesson after every 10 lessons. That's something that you'll just need to decide. If one of your focus standards is something in your math practice standards, these are good lessons that cover a lot of those practice standards. So just, kind of take a look at that. They give a little variety because it's different than the day-by-day lesson and the routine of Saxon. So it adds a little variety in there. So like every 5th day, they're going to have an assessment. So that kind of breaks it up. And then they have these investigation lessons every 10 days. Just wanted to remind you that I already shared with you, every lesson has a reteach lesson. And so, some of my teachers are using that concise reteach when they're doing pilots, because it allows them to teach a couple of lessons at one time and just use that condensed version. All right, if you are still with me, I want to share these adaptations with you because you're going to need to use these to start on Monday since your students don't have a book. However, they can't solely use these without a book. So if you're looking at the adaptive version, that's what this is. But I want you to look at the textbook version. So the textbook version says the perimeter of a square is 11 centimeters. Describe how to find the length of each side. Now, the square is drawn here, and then the problem is stepped out for them. Same thing with 25. The problem is written out for them. However, they would not know what to do with that key if they hadn't had this problem to read. And so I do see that you will probably use the online, and it will probably have logged me out. So we'll just check real quick to see. Yep. If you're not on it within a few minutes, it does tend to log you out. So we'll get logged back in real quick because I want to share this with you since we discovered you didn't have textbook per student. So the student textbook is going to be on your carousel. One nice thing about the Think Central carousel, and by the way, in our 6th grade program, when you log in, it logs into a screen like this on Think Central, but as soon as you access any one of the resources, it will take you to that HRW platform that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to toggle over to the 5th grade. Now, one thing that makes it real easy for your eyes is the student materials are yellow. So I can see real quickly that there's my student edition. And I can very quickly go to my volume 1. And once I go to that student edition, it's going to open a more contents tab over here, which makes it then very easy for me to get to the table of contents for that book, to get to the lesson that I need for that particular day, because all of your lessons are in sections. Remember, I shared that with you, and you have a section overview for every one of your sections. And so I could quickly say I wanted to, we already know we were going to start with lesson 64. And so I can go right in here, and find that. I think I clicked on the wrong one, but I can go right to that lesson. Now, I want to share another little quick tip for navigation. You see on the left-hand side where it says page view, one of the things that I like to do is, because it defaults to that middle view, I like to go to the first view. Number one, it makes it bigger. Now, you can zoom the middle view as well, but I like to make it bigger, and then I lose my arrows on the right and left. So if I go to the first view, it's actually a scrolling view. And so I can easily scroll up. So you can display this student book as you're going through the lesson with them. And then once you get to that written practice, you'll have that here to display. The one thing you might want to do in written practice is making it a little bit smaller so you have more problems displayed at a single time, because your students will need to be able to see these to actually work out the problems. So they can work on that plain blank box paper that I showed you an example of. Or if you want them to work on the adaptation ones, then if you'll look on that Padlet, which I'll give you that link to it here in just a few minutes, but on the Padlet, over here where it says digital resources, one of the things that I'll click on for digital resources, and my course book teachers, you have something even in addition to that, but once you're in here, you'll see these are answer keys for those resources. So that's one thing. Remember how I shared with you, you'll display the answers to Power Up. The next day, you'll display the answers to that written practice. Well, you'll get that from this folder right here that says Intermediate 5. And then just jumping back here, my course book, you also have something that's called instructional presentations. They didn't have these for intermediate because in intermediate they were done on Flash. And so, of course, as we know, none of our computers operate with Flash. But in our course books, they were done using PowerPoint. So this is another something that you could use instead of projecting the student book. So once you get these open, as you can see, you have rights here to download it. But once you go, you can just click right from that main screen. It's going to take you right to the fact practice. You can scroll over back and forth from there, or you can go to different lessons, or you can go back to the main menu, then go quickly to the practice set. I can go to the main menu. I can click the written practice, and there's going to be my answers for that. So that's another place where you can go to display those answers, but you might want to use the presentation for teaching the new concept. And so you'll see those on that Padlet as well as those adaptations. I actually put the adaptations in their own column here. And so once you click on that link, again, it's going to take you to a folder for each one of the textbooks. So you'll see my Course 1 teacher, you'll locate yours from the Course 1 folder. Intermediate 5 teacher, you'll locate yours from the Intermediate 5 folder. They are done in every assessment's done, as well as every investigation is done. But if you wanted to do it from the lessons, then you would just simply find whatever lesson it was that you were going to use for that day. I'm just going to quickly open one of these. They open in a 10-lesson spread. And so you can see, oh, by the way, some teachers like to use this for the condensed teaching because the adaptations have already identified the key example from the new concept that you absolutely need to teach. So, for example, if your new concept had, say, 4 to 6 examples, they're going to put the key 1 or 2 example that you need to make sure that you've done. So sometimes if you're going to teach more than one lesson, you could teach from the top part of these adaptations. Now, here's your boxed paper already set up for you, but again, you would still need to have that student edition projected so they could read the problem while they're doing working on their adaptation. Now, it will still be very easy for you to move around to do whatever, 8 to 10 problems you want to do with them, because you can quickly just move around from the student edition. And then you'll have to pull it back up on the student edition page and display about those first 10 problems, giving them a few minutes to complete whatever you haven't already done with them, and then moving on. So any questions about that written practice? I don't want to move on before I clarify those things because, as I said, that's one of our key parts of the program.
I do have a question. We are a Google district. Our teachers do not have PowerPoint. So you mentioned that the documents were in PowerPoint form. Are they hosted on your site, or would they have to download them and put them into Google Slides?
They'll probably have to download them. Now, once they download them, it depends on your system, obviously, but a lot of times you can don't open it, do a right click and then go to open in and then choose Google Slides. So sometimes you can do it that way, or you want to download them anyway. You don't want to have to go to that Padlet every day to get it. So I would just, as I download them, then just create me a folder in my Google Slides and just move them in there into your Google Drive.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I hadn't even thought about that. Okay, so again, you do have that reteaching that goes every single lesson. Again, concise, example of the reteaching at the top, and then problems there. I'm not going to go into these, obviously, because you're not going to use them all for that 20-day pilot, but the main one that you might want to take a look at is the second one here that says cumulative test. I don't know that I would actually give power-up tests in these 20 days because you have gone already, 80 days of school without doing it every day, so that might, kind of be a little much to do that because they're also cumulative. But I would, after about 10 days of the program, maybe give them, first of all, I want you to give them a test on Monday just to kind of get a idea of where they're scoring in the sequence of the Saxon lessons. And if they score fairly well on that test 13 and 15, then you can kind of just roll with where you're at on your recommended standard focus, just keeping in mind with that written practice not to do anything that you don't think they have been taught thus far. I already shared this form with you just to make sure that you know where it is. And the reason I say this is I did not hear anybody that was looking at their materials tell me that they had an assessment guide. Does my intermediate 5 or course 1 teacher, it'll be a separate booklet and it says assessment guide?
No, we don't have that either.
Okay, and that's perfectly okay because remember when you're on, think central here, now this time it will be an orange icon and you see it right here, it says assessment guide. And so I can open that assessment guide. It's got a table of contents. It's got assessment teacher edition. That's going to have answers for you. It's going to have your student Blackline Masters. So this is, you need to know this right away because this is where you will need to go to get that assessment. You're going to have your placement tests and benchmark tests, all that at the beginning there. But you want to get on down to the actual, pass the power-up test and all to the cumulative test. And once you get there, that's when you'll start looking for that cumulative test 13 and 15. So once you find those, and we've finally gotten there, so this is the test 1. But you'll want to find test 13. There's only 20 questions on there. Even if you don't have them do maybe 10 questions for test 15 and 10 questions for 13, something like that. That would be okay too. But that's where you're going to go if you want to just give a little flavor of the assessments. After you've taught for about 10 days, you might want to give another one. Maybe go back and pick up assessment 14 or 16, either one. Okay? Whew, what questions do you have for me? I know we have got 1 minute left on our time, so. While you're thinking of questions, this is another beauty of Saxon when you're teaching it to fidelity. For example, I gave cumulative test 18. And problem number 2 came from lesson 88. If I had students that missed it, I want you to see what's going to happen because this test was in lesson 95. In lesson 96, guess what? There's problem number 4 came from lesson 88. In lesson number 99. Guess what? Problem number 1 came from lesson 88. And then I get to, after lesson 100, I'm giving test 19. Guess what? I'm going to assess on it again. But I had 3 opportunities to find a sibling problem and reteach that when I'm doing my 10 problems with them of written practice. And so that just sets my students up for success. So I do want you to write down this Padlet. And again, you already know that you don't have access to it right now. They have to go in and turn the block off. But Padlet.com/McKibben/Saxon Math. I think you probably already wrote it down from when we shared it earlier with the group. I also want to make sure that you know on the Padlet that you do have that same resource, the professional learning guide. Also, my course teachers, you have one that's strictly just for the course book as well. And, just kind of peruse around on there. There's some other resources that you might want to use if you're going to do a Power Up folder or anything like that. I am going to let you go, if you will promise to do this feedback survey for me. You just know that on the Padlet, you can click right there. It'll take you straight to it. The session code is written right there for you, and my name is also written there for you. So what questions do you have for me right before we sign off for today?
It looks like they're all taking pictures of the feedback survey and working on that.
Perfect. And I know this was not ideal, and I understand that, and so that's why I have requested to have those touch points with you all. So I will be working on a date to get that scheduled. So as you're beginning to implement, be sure and jot down your questions so we can get those answered for you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you for letting me share Saxon Math with you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so for our group, we're moving to agenda item 1.4, which is upcoming committee meetings. The committee will discuss the proposed timeline for future meetings. Your Saxon Math pilot will end on March 2nd, 2025. We'll be meeting again on March 25th. Hold on. Your pilot will end on March 25th. I missed a number in my script, sorry. March 25th, and then on March 25th, the same day it ends, we're meeting again for pilot number 2, which will be Math in Focus. During this time, you'll work with the second vendor and get trained on using their resource for the second pilot. The timelines that are on your tables are correctly done with the calendar. It's just me and my notes. And the last part is our agenda item 1.5, which is adjournment. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule. We really appreciate you participating. Don't forget to take all of your resources with you and have a wonderful rest of the day. And I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 6:01 p.m. Thank you. Cheryl, I think this is yours. No, this is your book. I don't know what just for your that's 6th grade number. Sure. Do you want one just for your information? Just so you have it. Yeah, but I'm not sure you have it. See, I'm old fashioned.